Okay, so in 1980, it marked the 25th anniversary of Charlie Parker's passing, and the Newport Jazz Festival was hosting a Year of the Bird tribute. And the special guests that Ira Gitler and George Wein, is that the way, is that pronunciation of his
Wayne.
last? Yeah,
Yeah.
so Ira Gitler and George
WEIN.
Wein uh, were able to locate my father, who was never hidden. He was like hidden in plain sight, and they
Right.
were very excited to get him. So they had a consecutive uh, concert on the east side. Let's say the concert began at 8 o'clock at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And 20 minutes later, then the musicians were ushered away to Avery Fisher Hall and Lincoln Center on the west side. And my father being the special guest, they asked him to play Cherokee. So he came out in the horn section. The three alto saxophonists that they had waiting for him was Lou Donaldson, James Moody, and Lee Konitz. But after the first rehearsal, there was only one rehearsal, a little guy had been sitting in the corner with his chair turned backwards, just checking out my father. And then he came up to my dad and held his arm and just shook his hand and said, "Listen, I play with everybody. I know everybody. I've always heard about you, but I never thought I'd have the opportunity to meet you. My name is George Benson," and that's how they met.
Oh,
Hi, Kim Parker, James Fleet here, son of Biddy Fleet. I have waited over 50 years to speak with you, to see you, to meet with you. So I'm completely honored. I thank Jeff. I thank you. And I know from heaven to earth, something beautiful is going on.
This is great. This is great. I know that you had that enthusiasm when we first connected on Facebook, if I'm correct.
That's
And I
correct.
can tell, I could tell by then that you were very excited. And
Oh, yeah.
this is kind of a historic get together here,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
by certain standards.
Jeff will attest to the fact that I am never speechless. But I'm
That's true.
speechless. I'm speechless. Thank you. That is very, very,
Oh, yeah.
that's very touching. Thank you.
You're the link.
Well, I'm the little bubble up in the corner.
Okay. Okay.
I just said a little bubble in the corner, right? Right now, you're the
Right
bubble.
now,
Little
yeah.
bubble in the corner.
Well, this is great. This is great. Let's just get this party started.
Okay.
You are, you and your father in particular, and you are. But it sounds like you're on a mission of sorts to make sure that people understand who your father really was. Am I correct?
You're correct. And who he was to Charlie Parker
In particular,
in particular.
yeah. You're a musician, though, right?
I'm a musician, yeah. I play woodwinds. I'm the only person alive, I believe, who can say that they had the same music teacher as Charlie Parker.
Oh, that's very interesting. And he happens to be your father, too.
You have to speak my
Uh,
father, yeah.
yeah. Are you performing now?
I I had left the music industry for about 40 human years.
Okay.
And father got a job, steady income, worked for the city, but I never gave up my passion for music. So now I'm retired.
And you play the guitar and saxophone. and
First
flute,
instrument
right?
was guitar. My father was my teacher, and but I'm a southpaw, and that sort of changes the thing. Not much, but at that time when I was young. So I switched to alto saxophone in 1967, and
Okay.
here's what happened. So I was working on a marching song called "You're a Grand Old Flag,"
Hmm.
and my father knocked on the door and just opened the door slightly and stuck in a 78 recording, a record. And he said, "Put this on, it'll open up your ears." So at 12 years old, I put on his 78 recording, and it was a song called Ornithology. And
Mm-hmm.
when I listened to it, I could not associate what I was hearing on the record with the instrument that I was holding in my hand. And so I put the saxophone underneath the bed. But that was my entrance into the larger world of who my father was and his friend, who I've known about my entire life, named Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a that's a great story.
It's the truth.
Oh. Yeah, I believe you. A lot of stories are true.
Yeah.
And you're also a graphic designer, illustrator,
I'm an illustrator. I used to
right?
work for toy companies, greeting card companies, the whole thing. But as you know, as a performer, and when you're self employed, working freelance, you're wearing different hats at all times. And so, as the family was increasing in number, I needed steady income. And the
Right.
music industry does not always offer that immediately. And so I just left the music industry alone. I had great teachers, excellent saxophonist named John Stubberfield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Stub was my teacher. My father was the mentor to a excellent flautist named Frank West. So yeah,
Okay.
that's the pedigree that I came up in. But I put that all aside and went and got a job in the school system in New York City.
Right. 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 Did some research, just trying to find some information about you, and I found this great interview that you did about 20 years ago with Maxine Gordon,
Absolutely.
uh, and we got quite a bit of information from that interview. I might put a link up to it in this um, in this podcast later. But it was really interesting to read. Your father's from Maryland, right?
Bowie,
From
Maryland. Absolutely.
Bowie.
Hmm.
Okay, that's how it's pronounced. Uh, and have you gone back there? Do you visit? Have you?
Absolutely. As fate would have it, we became grandparents 3 years ago, and our son, James Jr., is a graduate of Howard University, and he met his soon to become wife there. They
Oh
became
wow,
parents, so we are back and forth between New York, Maryland, Washington, D.C. on a regular basis.
wow. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that's great.
Well, we're all connected to that area as well. My son and his wife work in D.C. and they live in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and,
yeah. My daughter
and
was there for a good while.
yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Her
And Kim,
husband
you
is from the area.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Kim, you and I have another special connection because your day of birth is the same day as my wife and I's wedding anniversary, that being August 22nd.
Oh, really?
Truly,
It's a great day.
It
truly.
is a great day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
so,
that day.
yeah. So
Yeah,
do
uh,
I.
it's the last day
yeah.
of Leo.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I gave a big roar.
some wonderful, wonderful connections. Some wonderful connections.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so you have to tell us some stories about your dad and Charlie Parker, or
Okay.
whatever you can remember him telling us that a
Uh,
lot of
I,
people
rem-
don't know about.
I remember most of it. Uh, from the time I would say maybe I'm 5 years old, the adults I knew about in my life were my mother, my father, my aunt Agnes, um, my uncle Wallace, and Charlie Parker.
Hmm.
My father talked about, and he never called him Charlie. It was always Bird,
Mm-hmm.
because they were, yeah, they were that close. When Charlie Parker, you know what's been historically stated and written. So I am here because of what Charlie Parker said about my father. Basically, had it not been for Bird, my father would be a footnote in the history of jazz. But it meant that this is what a lot of historians did not get. It meant that much to Bird for him to mention Biddy Fleet. But if the historians had done their due diligence, they should have sought out Biddy Fleet and asked him face to face, well, why was that? What is it that really happened above and beyond what Charlie Parker said in the 1949 interviews, which is only a tip of the iceberg of what actually occurred in their relationship? And that's why I'm here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, I read that that interview that you did with Fordham, and I really found it very interesting, and I really appreciate that you did that for a lot of reasons, which I'll elaborate on. Uh, the Bird didn't give a lot of interviews. Bird, I mean, there was one wonderful radio interview that I was given a cassette when I was working in a club in Copenhagen. This DJ came up and handed me a cassette of an interview that that Bird did for a radio program, being interviewed. Bird being interviewed by Paul Desmond.
Hmm.
It killed me. I because I was a grown woman in my mid to late 30s, and it brought back Bird's voice for me
Right, right.
because I couldn't remember his voice. I
Wow.
hadn't heard his voice.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole lot that has not been paid attention to. So you can't feel so slighted because Bird was slighted.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
so your dad was slighted. I was slighted. My mother was slighted. A
Mm.
lot of people were slighted.
Mm-hmm.
Jazz was slighted.
Yeah.
You know, but one of the reasons that I really loved the the interview that you did with Fordham was how you were so detailed. Your memory was so detailed about your parents, your relatives, your teachers, your neighborhood,
Yeah.
the stores, the people on the block. Just your whole recreation of your life.
Mm-hmm. I have a
Yeah, it was a
question to
great.
ask you, if I may.
Yes.
Did your dad ever mention Biddy Fleet to you or your mom?
Not that I know of.
Right. I kind of figured that. And so here's what it is. when Charlie Parker came to Harlem, as historically reported, in the fall of 1939, a lot of people think that he came directly from the Midwest. That's not true. He came from Chicago.
Yes, I know that.
And he sort of like, has made his way to New York. And he came to New York City for two reasons. If you give me one, I'll give you the other. But when he came to New York in 1939, he came to see two people specifically.
I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay,
We're waiting to hear.
one was
You have them both.
one was his mentor, being I think it's
Buster Smith
Buster
was
Smith, the saxophonist,
yeah,
who a lot of people don't know was 16 years older than Bird.
yeah,
My
yeah,
father was 10 years older than Bird.
right.
Charlie Parker, of course, your father, born August 29th, 1920, right? And my father was born September 17th of 1910. And so that's the first person that he came to see, right? But the other
Right.
person who he wanted to get with, and I'm sharing, I don't know if this is historically known, he wanted to get with Art Tatum.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because Art Tatum,
Bird had
Well,
something
it's
to
Art
learn.
Tatum. Yeah,
he was
Bird had
fantastic.
something to learn.
yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. Art Tatum is historically one of the greatest piano players in the history of jazz.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, that makes sense.
One of the greatest musicians.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So when this I can share about the Dan Wall Chili Joint Jam Sessions. Okay,
right.
so what's been reported over the last, I guess, 70 years is that Pop played a little bit of chord inversions and all of that, and Bird picked up on it, and then boom, he came alive. That is absolutely not all that happened. Not all. One of the things that did happen was that, yes, my father would change the chord inversions, and Charlie Parker, who was well, you already know, he was a bona fide genius. He was a genius. He had a God given gift. But there were two geniuses at the Dan Wall Chili Joint sessions. My father had a natural ability on the guitar. His phrasing, even his licks, were very reminiscent to what I later heard with Charlie Parker. And so they were not just friends at this jam session. They were friends up until throughout Charlie Parker's life. But something major happened with your dad in 1940 that separated him from my father. And that was the death of Bird's father in 1940.
Really?
Yeah. And
And
so,
why would that have
right, because then
why
Charlie Parker and my dad was playing with a guy named Banjo Bernie Robinson. And just this is not I'm sharing a big nugget here. They were getting sweated, meaning they were not getting paid properly. Yeah, if I'm correct, this is in York, Pennsylvania. This is early 1940, late 1939. And then in 1940, um, your grandfather, or Charlie Parker's father, died, and he died tragically. And so Bird left Biddy in 1940 to go to the funeral of his father. And after that funeral, he did not come back to rejoin with my father. He went and hooked up with his old musical buddy, Jay McShann. This is the in, I'm giving you the in-between part.
Uh,
And when he went with Jay McShann, he was given a feature solo in a very special song that is a pivotal part in the history of what
Cherokee.
Cherokee.
Yeah.
But what he was playing was partly what my father had taught him.
Well, I know that Jay McShann uh, first heard Bird in 1937 in Kansas City,
Right, right.
and he spoke with Bird and he said, "Where are you from? Because you don't play like anybody from here."
That's right. Right,
So Bird was already on his way
right.
because he'd already been to the Ozarks.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And just
Excuse me.
continuing on the well, how do I want to say this? Yeah. So when in 1937, my father taught Frank West. Okay, this is in Washington, D.C., 1937.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Frank West at age 15. And Frank West remembered it so well that in 2012, at his 90th birthday celebration, in other words, 75 years later, at Dizzy's Cafe here in New York City, as his special guest, he had my wife and I, because he remembered what my father had taught him.
Hmm.
And he carried that to Frank West used to get on me all the time about not coming out and playing. And he would say, don't do what your father did. Okay, my father was largely under recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And Bird was very much recorded, very much recorded. So in the mentoring process at Dan Wall's Chili Joint, it wasn't just my father and Charlie Parker. There were other musicians there as well. Vic Dickinson, the trombonist, was absolutely at the Dan Wall Chili Joint sessions. Orrin Hot Lips Page, who had a gig down at the Apollo Theater, was and him and Bird knew each other from the Midwest. Was
From Kansas
absolutely
City.
uh, 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 um, was absolutely at the sessions. Okay, when Bird first came in to Dan Wall's Chili Joint, he would not play. I'm sharing this. He would not play. He put his horn up against the corner and just sat down and listened. And he was listening to my father. And my father had to make him play. This is Charlie Parker at 19 years old, and my father at 29 years old. And when he started playing, a couple of cats and a few kittens didn't understand what he was doing. But Biddy and Bird immediately, they understood each other. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how it began. And it wasn't just on a song called Cherokee. I'm sharing a big nugget here. One of the things that my father did, he put there was a song called Night Owl by Eddie Cantor. And he put Night Owl in the middle of Cherokee, in the bridge of it, and it turned Bird's head around. He said, oh, like this. The one
Yeah.
thing that my father always said about Charlie Parker is that Bird and his saxophone were one.
Bird had ears.
He he had that other thing that Dizzy called pyrotechnics, but what Charlie, his facility,
Oh.
his natural, see when, okay, Jeff is, you're a saxophonist, right?
Yeah.
So you can woodshed, but you can woodshed and become very proficient on the wrong stuff. and you become excellent on but the skill set and whatever Bird shed it on in the Ozarks, and then once he got with my father, well, guess what? And based on his own genius, his own interpretation, it was on.
Yeah.
Well, Bird
Yeah.
didn't woodshed anymore.
Well, I'm sure he practiced probably not
No, he
12
didn't.
hours a day.
Not anymore. He
Right.
never played at home. He never picked up the horn.
And when my father would play something,
Neither did Phil.
when my father would play something, especially if it's something that Bird liked, he would say, "Biddy, would you play that again?" And my father would say, "What?" And he said, "What you just played." And my father would play it, and whatever it was, however complex it was, and Charlie Parker would get it down cold. First time. Everything was the first time. The first time. And so that put him in I mean, when you look unfortunately, there's very little live footage of Parker playing. But if anybody, as a saxophone, I have long fingers. Your father's fingers were tailor-made for the alto. You don't, when he's making those runs, and my father used to call them snakes, Bird would be playing snakes. The other people, they didn't know what he was doing, but Pop did. You would barely see his fingers move. That's how tailor-made his fingers were for the alto. He had a different sound and a different approach when he played tenor saxophone. And I don't know if you knew this. You probably did. Yeah. He was also a very good clarinetist.
Never heard him play clarinet. I don't know if there's any recordings.
He could also play clarinet.
I'm not surprised.
Oh, he was that guy. He was.
Yeah,
that
he
guy.
was definitely that guy.
And
go ahead.
No, Jeff, go ahead.
No, it's just his genius came so early in his life, and he'd only been playing the saxophone for a few years, seriously playing for a few years.
Right.
I believe just something like 4 to 5 years before he, pretty much changed improvisation. So that doesn't come out of just practicing. There has to be something gift. There has to be, yeah. No, there had to be some genius that we all agreed to, as the world agrees to. You can. There are people who practice for 20, 30 years who don't have and never will have what Charlie Parker was born with. We all agree with that, and your father too. It sounds like so. Your father did do us all a disservice by not recording, but that was his choice. That was his choice.
Yeah.
Dad
Said
also recorded, and he took a lot of, he did a lot of stuff because he needed money for drugs,
Well, with that, what my father did tell me was that never once, that the whole drug thing, never once did that ever come up.
No, Bird kept it away from our house. He kept it away from, and he said to he kept people away from my mother. He kept people away from me.
Right.
We didn't discuss people. We didn't discuss drugs. We didn't discuss musicians. That's why you asked me about Biddy. I'm not saying anything about Biddy being dirty or anything like that. Bird didn't discuss anything about that. Anything about business.
Right.
He didn't bring it home.
Okay.
And he didn't bring home drugs. He didn't bring home anything like that.
And he didn't bring it around Biddy either. That's the point.
Yeah.
And wherever
he was kind that way. He was thoughtful that way.
Yeah. And he was also very, for his genius, I felt, look. 1947 Con 6M.
Mm.
Whoa. What? Wait.
There's more.
Whoa. Wait. What do you mean there's more?
Yeah. Well, if you like, I play a 1947 Con 6M because that's what your father played on his historic first recordings, and then most notably, he played a Con Super 20.
How long have you had
Yeah.
that horn? How long
I've
have you
had
had
this
it?
now. This is my go-to horn, and I've got custom Zeeves, the whole thing, Selmers, all of this. But
How long have you had them, though?
I've had this easily 10 years.
Okay.
Huh.
10 years. 10 years. And so here's the other thing, because I come bearing gifts. This is my father's 1938 Gibson ES 150. This is the guitar that he taught Charlie Parker how to play Cherokee on.
That is wonderful.
Wow.
This is the guitar. This is where, yeah. So that's
Do
one of
you play that? Do you ever play that?
I haven't had time to, but now that I'm retired, please know in 1988 when the movie came out, Biddy Fleet's phone was ringing off the hook.
I bet.
Oh, because what it is all roads to Charlie Parker's epiphany on the saxophone lead to one person. And when you don't go to that one Biddy Fleet, and when you don't go to that one person, you don't do complete due diligence, it's not a completely truthful story.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what happened.
In my play, I have a play I do about Charlie Parker. That's how Kim and I met. And I that quote is in the play. A friend of mine saw the play, gentleman who knew your father. He saw your father play somewhere in New York, upstate New York, where your father would play from time to time. So he saw my play maybe 3 times, and every time he would bring up your father, you know. So
Refresh my mind. What is the quote?
I haven't performed a play in some years, but I was jamming up at Dan Wall's. It's a chili house on 139th. And I was working through Cherokee with Vic Dickerson, Jabbo Smith, and with Biddy Smith. And Biddy started playing this odd chord progression on his guitar. It sounded like what I was hearing in my head. So I had to ask him what it was he was playing. He was adding altered notes to chords to get variations. I altered the quote a little bit. He was using different versions of the chord as the melody line to have variations, and I heard it and I came alive. So I kind of embellished the quote a little bit that I had read.
Biddy Smith, but you.
Oh well, I'm sorry. You know what I mean. Biddy, yeah.
You lost your mind there.
I did. That happens at times.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a musician around here named Biddy too. But anyway, that's beside the point. But I did. I found that quote.
Yeah.
And this was before the internet was the internet, and you just couldn't Google somebody and find them. You know, that's how old that play is. So I found Max Roach because he's Max Roach.
Right.
I found Kim. I found Doris Parker, one of Charlie Parker's wives. But in all honesty, I had no idea your father was still alive when I wrote the play.
Oh, wow. Very, very interesting. Yeah. And so it wasn't just alto chords that Pop shared with Bird. It was also POIs. POI, which means patterns of improvisation.
Oh.
It wasn't
Explain.
because if you think about it, okay, and you're well aware of your father's legendary playing, and you as a alto saxophonist particularly, you're aware of his soloing and just his playing. In what he played, I can't hear the altered chords, but I know what I do hear. I hear some super fantastic improvisational lines. And that's where the lines get sort of blurred in terms of the additional impact that pop probably had on Charlie Parker. Give you a good example. There's a well-known song by Bird called Scrapple from the Apple. Right? So Scrapple from the Apple, the melody is right? Right? That's first part of Scrapple. But that's based off of a lick. And the lick, like the first part, that part, but the lick is which is a Biddy Fleet lick. So,
Go ahead. Do you have any recordings
yes, I
of
do.
your father?
Yes, I do.
So what do you plan to do with them?
Yeah. Now that I'm retired, I'm working on consolidating his recordings, which is a task unto itself because he recorded with a lot of obscure people. He recorded with some people who have name recognition, but to get all of that together, that's my journey.
About how many hours do you have?
How many hours of it?
Yeah, I'm just saying how much.
I have a 2-hour video documentary of my father.
Wow.
Performing in that 2 hours.
Performing and sharing more of what I'm sharing with both of you.
Oh, wow. That's fabulous.
The other part is this.
Together.
The year that you were born, something profound happened to your father. 1946 is a pivotal year in your family life. It's your birth, right? But it's also Camarillo.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was in California.
Right. And so what people don't know, and I'm sharing, when Bird came out of Camarillo, California, one of the first people that he came to see in January of 1947 was my father.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wanted my father to work with him. Okay? And at that time, my father had a girlfriend named Eula, who became his wife, my mother. And your dad used to, let's say here's a couch, right? Or a love seat. My father would sit right in between both of them and just look at her and look at him and say, Biddy, look, I'm back. I'm good to go. Why don't you work with me? But that never happened. I don't know why. I wish it had, because it would have solved a lot of or answered a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
But that absolutely did occur.
Yeah.
When we talk about historic places in Harlem, I know people talk about Minton's and all of that, right? But there's one place that they probably don't know about that they should check out, and that's the Parkview Hotel. The Parkview Hotel, which is at 55 110th Street, is where my father lived. It's where Frank West lived. It's where your dad came to in 1947 and was there. So I guess what I'm saying is from 1939 to 1947, Charlie Parker and Biddy Fleet were friends throughout. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that this was just this one moment at Dan Wall's chili joint, and that was it. That's not true at all.
Right. Well, I think a lot of those reasonings is, and like we've stated, and other people have stated, is your father was pretty understated and didn't make a name for himself. He chose not to. And if he had, especially, considering what Bird had said about him, then it would be a lot, he would have gotten the attention that he deserved. When I read that interview that you did at Fordham, in New York there with Maxine, there's that one story of George Benson being very excited to meet your father. Could you tell that story? It's a great story.
Okay, so in 1980, it marked the 25th anniversary of Charlie Parker's passing, and the Newport Jazz Festival was hosting a Year of the Bird tribute. And the special guests that Ira Gittler and George Wein, is that pronunciation of his last? Yeah, so Ira Gittler and George Wein were able to locate my father, who was never hidden. he was like hidden in plain sight, and they were very excited to get him. So they had a consecutive concert on the east side. Let's say the concert began at 8 o'clock at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And 20 minutes later, then the musicians were ushered away to Avery Fisher Hall and Lincoln Center on the west side. And my father, being the special guest, they asked him to play Cherokee. So he came out in the horn section. The three alto saxophonists that they had waiting for him was Lou Donaldson, James Moody, and Lee Konitz. But after the first rehearsal, there was only one rehearsal, a little guy had been sitting in the corner with his chair turned backwards, just checking out my father. And then he came up to my dad and held his arm and just shook his hand and said, "Listen, I played with everybody. I know everybody. I've always heard about you, but I never thought I'd have the opportunity to meet you. My name is George Benson." And that's how they met.
That's a great story. That's a great story. How old was your father at this point when that happened?
This is 1970. He's always 10 years younger than whatever the decade is. So this is him at 70 years old.
Okay.
It's 1980. Yeah.
Did him and George continue to be friends? Do you know?
No, what did happen afterwards, because so suddenly, Biddy Fleet had resurfaced and the phone was ringing off the hook. Jay McShann came to my father afterwards and said, "Hey, listen, Stefan Grappelli needs a guitarist." Okay.
Wow.
Okay, but at age 70, Pop is not trying. He's not trying to do that.
Well, how old was Stefan? He must have been like 140.
he was ready to say he was pretty up there himself.
He was pretty old.
Right. But still could play.
Yeah.
If you ever get an opportunity, you should listen to the National Public Radio broadcast of Billy Taylor and Frank West about unsung jazz heroes of Washington, D.C. Because it'll be the story of three musicians. One, a pianist named John Malachi. The second being a trumpet player who they called Georgetown, but his real name was Dan Brashure.
Mm-hmm.
And the third person would be Biddy Fleet. Right. John Malachi. Excuse me?
No, I've heard of these names.
John Malachi he was the pianist with Billy Eckstein's band, his bebop band. But these guys were not necessarily leaving their homes to go out on the road and all of that.
Right. Well, it's a hard life.
Yeah. In order for Dr. Billy Taylor to start his career in Washington, D.C., he had to have Biddy Fleet on guitar.
Huh.
That's
give me that again.
right. John.
No. Yeah.
John Malachi, pianist,
How do you spell that?
MALACHI.
Uh-huh. And
Dan, DAN,
yeah.
Brasura, BRA, SH, BRASHEAR.
And Biddy.
And Biddy.
And what is the show called?
This is on, it's online. It's National Public Radio,
Yeah.
NPR,
Uh-huh.
Unsung Jazz Heroes of Washington, D.C.
Okay. So everybody gets it down there. Unsung Jazz Heroes of Washington, D.C.
That's right. Yeah,
That's terrific.
that's what it is.
Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's great having the two of you in this interview. You know, this is some history going on here. You know that, don't you? This is some history happening. So, I mean, Charlie Christian was a contemporary of your father's. You know,
Friends.
Probably they were. Any stories about him and him? Did he share any stories about him and Charlie Christian?
Yeah. So here's what. It was my father who brought Charlie Parker to Minton's. And when he was up there, Charlie Christian, of course, was there. They played together. There's even a biography on Charlie Christian. I forget the author's name, but I've got a footnote in there. But it talks about their collaboration. The jazz story is really about the guitar and the saxophone. It's guitarist. It's not. A lot of people think it's well. It's a culmination of many musicians and different instruments. But the part that the guitar played in jazz is really, really, really prominent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Pop knew Charlie Christian. He knew most of the guitarists out there, and there were many.
Yeah, not a lot. You know, it was difficult in those times to get any airtime for anyone.
Right.
You know?
Right. When you think about and it's a buddy of my father's. If you think about Duke Ellington and how he started his career, he started his career basically because of a guitarist, and it's a gentleman named Elmer Snowden. Elmer Snowden, because Duke was a member of Elmer's band called the Washingtonians.
Mm-hmm.
And Elmer and my father were partly responsible for the beginning career of Yul Brynner, the actor.
Oh, wow.
One thing leads to another, and
yeah. There's a part in that interview we read that your father had an opportunity that he turned down to perform with Louis Armstrong.
1937.
And he was how old at that time? He's
27.
He was 27.
Right. Okay.
And he knew Charlie Parker at that time.
In 1937?
No, he didn't know Charlie Parker.
Charlie Parker was not.
So he didn't meet Charlie Parker until he was 29.
Well, when my father was 29, yeah.
Right. So this happened before Bird was even in New York.
Bird was not even on the scene. He was not known. In 1937, of course, Louis Armstrong was big news.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Right. And so here's what it is. Yeah, so there was certain mannerisms that people of color took on in order to move the ball. And there were certain customs that my father did not agree with. He did not agree with. He understood it, boom, boom. a lot of things were stereotypical, and Pop was justly opposed to that. And
We know
so,
about those.
and so he turned down that opportunity. And was that a heavy career move? Heck yeah, that was heavy. But the next year, in 1938, a well-known pianist who was 20 years older than my father discovered my father in the Lincoln Colonnade, which was a part of the Lincoln Theater. Behind the Lincoln Theater, not the Lincoln Theater, behind the Howard Theater in Washington, D.C., was a section called the Lincoln Colonnade, where all the bands passed through, mostly the black bands. So Jelly Roll Morton discovered my father. And the next thing you know, they were in the recording studio together. And Jelly Roll Morton, this is in 1938, was 20 years older than my father. But he had to have him on his recording sessions. And those recording sessions, they're called the Baltimore Acetates, are now in the Smithsonian Institute.
Okay.
And the
But
songs that, and these are historical songs because my father solos on these songs. And one of the songs that he solos on was a well-known song during that time called Honeysuckle Rose. Right. So that's 1938. So when Charlie Parker, just sharing, recorded his first known recording, it was that very same song. Now,
yeah,
but that
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
so
got that recording.
mhm. So the question that we could ask is, did Biddy in any way influence Bird? And it's not even Biddy on the guitar. It's a gentleman named F.R.G. Ware.
yeah,
Okay, he's on the guitar. The question that I never asked my father is, Pop, how come you weren't on that gig? How come you weren't on that recording? I don't know. But
so go ahead.
I
right.
think
So
I
what I was going to
heard
say,
playing Honeysuckle Rose when he was 16, I think.
Yeah, I've heard about that being one of his favorite songs.
Got it on a loop.
and that's Bird. That's your dad at what, 19 years old, maybe
I think it
20,
was 16.
and he's killing it. And
Yeah,
he's so fluid beyond his years on it.
Yeah. Well, that was his gift.
yeah,
That was
it
his
was.
gift. Once
Now,
he nailed Cherokee, and it's the bridge.
yeah, it's the
Cherokee
bridge. Yep.
is in G for alto saxophone. It's in concert B flat for pianists and right. So once it got, and I'm just sharing what did occur. It was the bridge that was messing with Charlie, and it was messing with everyone. But once him and Pop got together, just now then it's just the two of them alone. They would get somewhere alone, and before, when you're woodshedding, before you can do something fast, it's going to be methodical. See, my father was not a fast player, but just about much of what I hear, like your dad, Bird was master of the triplets. He was a master of the triplets. Like, okay, okay, so, but that diddle is, okay, right? So once they worked out the bridge, it was the bridge that goes like a minor, then down to the major, then it's the minor of that major, and it's going down in whole steps. Yeah. And so once they nailed that, and Pop had it under his fingers, it was like there. And Bird said, "Hey, Biddy, yeah." And he just said, "That's when I came alive." And he
Yeah,
took the information and his own genius and his own skill set, which people are still trying to figure it out. That
So,
we are still musically drinking from the reservoir of Charlie Parker.
well, yeah, I mean, he is, standard
It's standard.
education and schools from high school all the way up to, graduate school.
Right.
Um, but you need to give us this gift of your father's recordings and documentary because, in today's world, when it's so easy to consume things and access things with, people having a TV in their pocket,
Right.
it's this is a good time to share with the world what your father chose not to, you
Okay.
know. And I don't know who you are speaking. Are you speaking to anyone about this documentary that you have?
Uh, I had met with Stanley Crouch.
Okay.
Yeah, I was at the lecture that he gave in Harlem 10 years ago. The late great
Right.
Stanley Crouch, once he came out with Kansas City Lightning. I purposely said nothing at the lecture. I waited because at any Charlie Parker function, especially if it's a lecture, the people who are there basically know the history. But once I surface and all I have to say is I'm the son of Biddy Fleet, it changes the whole color. It, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing. I was at one lecture and trumpet player Jimmy Owens was there, and once I mentioned, and this was up in Harlem, listen, hey, listen, I'm James Fleet, the son of Biddy Fleet. It changes the whole thing. Even the people who are on the dais, they freeze up because this is what it is. And so, to your point, afterwards, we spoke, and it was beautiful. And he did a lot of research, really, because he even got parts about Charlie Parker was also a friend to my aunt Agnes, okay, who lived in Harlem on 130th Street, and up the block from her was Basie's guitarist Freddie Green.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, old friends. So to your point, there's a lot that I need to do to consolidate the information and to move the ball forward, and possibly I would need some assistance with doing that.
If you reach out to the right people, and I know a few people, and I'll reach out to them. You can get some assistance and moving the ball forward.
Right.
Because it would be good to have some of this information out to people. Some people really, like George Benson, how he was just so excited to meet your dad. There are a lot of people who have probably heard of your dad and need this information. Simple as that. They need the information. It's important information. So I'll pass on this information to the people I know, and see if they're willing to help. Simple as
Right.
that, because it
Right.
needs to be out, and it
Right.
needs to be out there now.
This part I can
You know.
share also. In addition to being a guitarist, my father was also a licensed electrician, and he made his own amplifiers.
Hmm.
And right, so when I ran into Frank West at Birdland in 2005, he was playing with a group called Fluteology,
Mm-hmm.
and he hadn't seen Biddy Fleet even in a photograph in many years. So I came up there with one of my father's scrapbooks, and I opened it up and I said, "Hey, I'm the son of this guy." And he like, it was a moment. He said, "Oh, my man Biddy, the only man I know who could make a dead light bulb come back on." So my father was a licensed musician, and he made his own amplifiers. And I'm sharing this. Everything that I share with you is the truth. There was a fella in the front row taking notes at one of his performances. And at the end, he came backstage, introduced himself to my father, and his name was Les Paul.
Hmm.
There you go.
Right. To your point.
Gibson's own.
Right. That's why
Yeah.
this Gibson is pre-Les Paul. There was no Les.
Oh,
Wow.
that's interesting.
There we are.
It's really,
There we are.
I
man,
remember
this is,
Les Paul
But there
yeah.
is not
very
there is
well. Yeah,
there is
from,
not
well,
a
I mean, he was very famous when I was a child.
right. Right.
Les Paul and Mary Ford.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a day that goes by, Miss Kim Parker, that I do not think about your dad.
Hmm.
If there's any person in history, any human being who I regret not meeting, it is your father.
Well, I'll tell you a daddy story. Well, I'll tell you two daddy stories. My mother never called him Charlie. She always called him Bird. And I either called him Daddy or I called him Bird. And I loved his fingers because he would take me for walks and we would hold hands. I loved his fingers.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something about him.
Well,
Something
Yeah.
about those hands, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
in my world of saxophonists, and this is personal and this is completely subjective. There are two major saxophonists, maybe three, but there's two major saxophonists who changed the vocabulary of improvisation, mostly for saxophonists and jazz. My number one person is your father, bar none.
Mm.
He changed the whole thing forevermore. And the second, believe it or not, and I get a lot of flack from this, is Michael Brecker.
Hmm.
To me, Michael Brecker took the extensions from John Coltrane, codified it in another way. He was another genius. And took the register that is above the natural register of the saxophonist, which is a high F. He extended that and played it in a way that I've never heard any other person play it. And if you put together, I call it BBB, Biddy Burden Brecker. Biddy Burden Brecker, that's a full meal. That's a full musical vocabulary of jazz in terms of improvisation. The same way that Art Tatum and Bud Powell and Monk changed that music improvisationally on piano. The same way that Louis Armstrong, Jabbo Smith, Roy Eldridge, and Dizzy Gillespie changed trumpet playing in terms of improvisation. Bird and Brecker, to me, that's complete.
I love Monk.
Yeah. Yeah. I love Brecker. I can see why you get flack on that. But
Yes.
but I love I you know, I beg to differ.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's
I
not
said
about
it's
that.
subjective.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody's got their opinions.
Right.
But there's no denying Charlie Parker, and that's what we're kind of here talking
He was
about.
a
Your,
supernova.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Can I
there's no
share
denying that.
this little memory of mine?
Sure.
So in 1977, I'm walking down a well-known Brooklyn street called Fulton Street, and it's a nice summer day. And I'm walking down Fulton Street, and I hear all of this wonderful alto sax playing that sounded exactly like Charlie Parker. but this is 1977. And I'm looking around at the people in the street, and it was like they they weren't paying any attention to it. But all I could hear was this live sax. And I said, who in the world could this be? It can't be Bird. Bird's been going since 1955, right? And I went into this little club. I passed by this little club in Brooklyn called the Blue Cornet. And on stage, with only a handful of people there, was Sonny Stitt.
Oh, yeah.
Playing his playing his head off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sonny was sort of a contemporary of Charlie Parker. He came out some years later,
Right.
but he was recording in the 50s, and there's that great recording of him that you shared with us amongst the songs that you really liked with him and Sonny Rollins and Dizzy Gillespie, and they did a whole album together. But Sonny Stitt and he was one of the few that recorded on alto and tenor regularly.
Right.
There are people who would, on occasion play the two horns, but he would on the same album play both horns. But Sonny Stitt had a sound that was very familiar to Charlie Parker's, and there's some people who say he was doing the same thing as Charlie Parker during that time, and just Bird, got popular first before Sonny Stitt, because they were around the same age. Maybe Bird was about 5 years older or something like that. I don't know exactly the year Sonny Stitt was born. I've seen Sonny Stitt play a couple of times in person when he was alive.
Right.
That's pretty. Most people that know jazz and bebop associated their sounds.
Right.
So that's pretty. I'm not surprised it was Sonny Stitt that you heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. Now, look, we three could talk for another 5 hours.
Yeah.
And we should. We should just, off camera,
Right.
just have some conversations.
Right.
Because we obviously have, and especially you two have a common, person in your
I
life.
just want to say in closing, because it looks like we're closing, but I just want to say that I do think it's important that you continue your work and get out your father's legacy, because we need it to bolster the history of music and the people who formulated it,
Right.
and the truth of it, and it's important. And I have decided, because I am the age that I am, which is historic in itself, I feel. Never thinking I'd reach it, but here I am. Ta-da.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, it must be God.
Well, Kim has her landline.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I got mine, but yeah.
Yeah, I had to let mine
I
go.
told God I'd call back.
Okay.
But I have decided, because I've changed a lot. I have decided that with the craziness in the world and the craziness in electing a crazy person, that I have elected myself. And so that's it. I have elected me.
There you go.
So I'm just going to do good.
There you go.
Well, you got another vote here. I'll vote for you. So
There we go.
Well,
It's
what
unanimous.
What else can I do? So, you know, yay for me, and yay for you, and
Exactly.
yay for you,
You know.
and you know, I'm just that's what I do. I go to the supermarket, and I talk to strangers,
Okay.
and I say, "Oh, what is that vegetable? I've never. How do you cook with that? I've never used that before," and I engage people in conversation. And
Hmm.
I started this during COVID because everybody was wearing masks and they were looking at the floor.
Right.
And I couldn't stand it because nobody was looking at each other. And I got people to look up, and I just continued it. And I'm making people speak to one another.
Right.
Mm.
And that's what I do.
Right.
Mm.
So I'm not performing singing on stage anymore. I have recorded recently, more recently,
Oh,
but
okay.
and I enjoy that because it doesn't involve a cell phone. But but I am acting at the supermarket, and
Your acting career is still
you
going
can
strong.
catch
Got
me
it.
there like approximately once every 9 days.
Okay.
And you can catch my act, and I'm quite popular,
I'm
and
sure.
I do have a
I'm
small
sure.
following,
Right.
and so I have elected myself, and that's it. That's
Bravo.
Here we
speech.
are. Here
Yeah.
we are. Yes.
Okay.
Well.
Great.
Well, this has been great. Uh,
I agree. I agree.
yeah.
It has been.
I didn't
This.
mean to make it all about me, but I
Oh,
did.
come on. It's about us here.
Yeah.
It's about us. I think it's all about us.
No, but
You know.
I do. I think it's important to make your father's history live and for you to present it because it's your history
Absolutely.
and it's lovely and
Hmm.
it's
And it's
lovely.
and it's American history.
That's
It's
right.
You know.
American
That's
history
It
right.
it really
and
is.
it's alive and it deserves to live
I
and be
mean,
presented.
music, blues, jazz, as they say, is Americans' art form, you
That's
know,
right.
and
Absolutely.
obviously your father was a big part of it. And so we got to get this story out there. And I want to officially apologize for saying Biddy Smith. I was thinking Bunny Smith,
No.
and you guys got to
Understood.
put me on the spot there to try to remember that script, which I haven't performed that play, and almost I met Kim performing that play in Kansas City.
Right.
So I haven't performed it in maybe like 6 years or something like that. So I'm trying to
Okay.
get it back on its feet.
Right.
Um,
You sound
but
fantastic.
you can't get up there and try to be Charlie Parker and don't practice your saxophone.
Come on,
You
man.
know.
Right.
But again, this has been great,
Yes.
um, and excellent. It's been great to meet you,
Yes,
Same
and
here.
I would like to see some of your art.
Okay.
Um, and some point, you got to have a showing, some type of opening of your art. I know you have like decades of stuff that no one has seen but you and your
This
wife and your
this is
kids.
this is true. This is
You
true.
can't,
Yeah.
so you probably have stuff about art, that mixes music, and I'm sure you have it. So all of that needs to come out as well as this film and some type of album release of your father and your work, because you're an artist like your father,
Yeah.
you know. So, and it sounds like you're one of the few of your siblings that is sort of keeping that alive from the research I've done that you shared in that interview you did
Yeah.
with,
I
with
have.
Maxine.
I'm that person.
Yeah, you're that guy.
and you're retired, but you're just a young pup. You were
I'm
born
liking.
in.
I'm liking you more with each word that you say. Did I tell you I was hard of hearing? Can you repeat that again?
just a young pup. You were born in Have I looked you up?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all
Can I
there.
share, in closing, let me share
Mm-hmm.
this little nugget with you. So, Biddy Fleet Jr., William Fleet Jr., my brother, passed away in
Oh,
2013. At the please receive, check out what I'm about to tell you. At the funeral, which was out here in Brooklyn, um, that funeral, that funeral 11 years ago marked my return on the alto saxophone.
oh,
And when I came into the funeral hall with my horn and my drummer came in, the person who ran the funeral hall, Mr. Shepherd, he said to me, "Hey, what you gonna do?" And that's verbatim. And our drummer, Larry Williams, he said, "Well, this guy here, he's gonna play saxophone. His father played with Charlie Parker." And this is in Fairhaven Funeral Home. Mr. Shepherd said to me, "Charlie Parker, what you guys know about Charlie Parker?" I was at the funeral hall in 1955, and it was my uncles who helped with the funeral arrangements for your father.
wow.
Oh.
If you have any records of the homegoing service of your dad, look, you will probably see Shepherd and Sons or whatever. But Mr. Shepherd, I'm just sharing, who was a young mortician in 1955.
My father was swept away. My
Wow.
mother had nothing to do
So
with it.
certain things are not coincidence to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Certain things were meant to happen.
Yeah. And
You
so
know.
this is my, you two are my Christmas gift.
Hey.
This is it.
Merry
I
Christmas.
made my day.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful.
Yeah,
Merry Christmas
Thank you
lovely.
very much.
and
Thank
a
you, Jeff.
happy
Thank you.
new year.
Same to you. Same to both
Happy
of you.
New Year. Let's go into 25. So.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll be back in contact.
Oh
with each
yeah,
other.
don't you worry
Yeah.
about that. We definitely will be contacting you. Thank you for checking out the podcast. We really appreciate it. Where else can you see James Fleet, son of the great Biddy Fleet, and Kim Parker, daughter of the great Charlie Parker, come together and have a conversation? Nowhere else but Let's Talk About Sax. So please, we really could appreciate your joining and pushing the subscription button. Thank you.